I'm Nancy Langton, Associate Dean of Accreditation and Strategic Initiatives at the Lewis College of Business, Brad D. Smith Schools of Business at Marshall University. I'm excited to be with you today. Welcome to the HERD 2020 Insights Small Business Webinar Series. We thank you for taking the time to attend this event. It's the 10th in a series of webinars given by the Lewis College of Business faculty and local business professionals. The series showcases the combined expertise of our best faculty and seasoned and knowledgeable practitioners from the business community in which we engage. The goal of this series is to help small businesses as they emerge from the COVID-19 crisis. Before we start the event today, I would like to introduce Avi Mukherjee, Dean of the Lewis College of Business, Brad D. Smith Schools of Business, who will say a few words about the college and its mission.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome everyone to this exciting event. We appreciate your interest in this HERD 2020 Insights Small Business Webinar Series. The mission of the Lewis College of Business and its Brad D. Smith Schools of Business is to promote economic development in the regional community and beyond. We do this by implementing our strategic priorities for external engagement and economic development, including lifelong learning programs, the Business and Economics Research Symposium, the Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series, and the CEO panel that many of you have attended. The college also has outreach centers, including the Center for Entrepreneurship and Business Innovation, or the I-Center, that helps small businesses innovate with a focus on design thinking, the BB&T Center for Leadership, that promotes consulting and research opportunities between students and the community, and the Transformative Sales and Service Excellence Center that supports training and career readiness in professional sales and customer service. The college also supports the Brad D. Smith Business Incubator to help promote entrepreneurship throughout the region. As the nation and the state start rebuilding businesses and economies coming out of the pandemic closures and lockdown, the Lewis College of Business is committed to supporting our local businesses, alumni, and other stakeholders in re-engaging, recharging, and redesigning their business models. Hence, we have developed this webinar series that will consist of presentations throughout the fall and into the spring every alternate week. We hope you enjoy today's presentation and take something out of it to use in your business or professional activities to make West Virginia and the surrounding area a better place for business and community engagement. Dr. Nancy Langton will now introduce today's speakers.
Thanks, Avi. Today's informative and engaging presentation is titled Small Business Planning in Times of Great Uncertainty. It is brought to you by Sharong Zhang and Dan McGowan. Sharong is a chair of the Finance, Economics, and International Business Department here at Marshall. He has a PhD in finance, and his research interests are in empirical corporate finance. Sharong is a CFA charter holder. Dan has been the president and CEO of Pioneer West Virginia Federal Credit Union for 10 years. He was named CEO of the Year in 2017 by the National Association of Federally Insured Credit Unions. Pioneer was recognized as the top 50 best credit union to work for in America in 2020. Dan is also on the College of Business Advisory Board. Sharong and Dan will discuss the opportunities and challenges for small businesses in the age of digitization. They will also provide lessons learned from a successful small business. Please feel free to ask questions via the chat function throughout the presentation. Sharong and Dan will answer them at the end. I now turn it over to our presenters.
Thanks, Nancy. I'm Sharong. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'll start off by focusing on the big picture, or at a more macro level, to give you an overview of the current state of small businesses. I'll then show you the performance and the contribution of small businesses to our economy in the last 2 decades. We will also discuss some challenges facing small businesses and opportunities as well. My part may be a little discouraging, but I hope my partner Dan will cheer you up a little bit later by telling a very successful story of local West Virginia small business. Small businesses are commonly defined as private business firms that hire fewer than 500 employees. And firms hire 500 or more are considered large businesses. And in fact, there were only 20,139 large businesses in year 2017. So we only have a very small number of large businesses in the United States. This small business profile is published by Small Business Administration, utilizing data collected and published by US Census. All these numbers are for year 2017, as there is a 2-year lag for US Census to collect and publish data. On this slide, we can see that the majority of private businesses are small businesses. There were 31.7 million small businesses, or 99.9% of all businesses were small businesses. Also, they hire a total of 60.6 million employees, and their share of all employees hired by all private businesses is 47.1%. Also, on the right-hand side, I show the kind of state of small businesses in West Virginia. So in West Virginia, we also have a large number of small businesses, and they actually hire relatively more employees than the national average. 2% more employees were hired by small businesses than other states or the national average. So small businesses are actually more important in West Virginia than in other states. So now let's see how small businesses have grown in the last 2 decades. This slide shows that the number of small businesses has increased from 21 million in 1997 to 31.7 million in 2017, an average annual growth rate of 2.1%. The number of small businesses has been growing steadily except for year 2008, when we had a financial crisis and economic recession. To give you some perspective as how significant that 2.1% is, in the same 21-year period from 1997 to 2017, the real growth rate of US economy as measured by GDP was 2.4%. And the annual US population growth rate was 0.9%, slightly under 1%. However, there are 2 different types of small businesses: a non-employer small business that does not hire employees, and an employer small business that hires employees. If we divide the total number of small businesses into these 2 types, this is what this slide shows. Basically, we find that the increase in small business firms is attributed almost entirely to non-employer small businesses, and the number of small businesses that hire employees has been virtually flat or stagnant. So in the next few slides, when I show the performance and the contribution of small businesses and compare to large businesses, I only use employer small businesses most of the time. We can use a few statistics collected and published by US Census to measure how small businesses have performed and contributed to the economy, and also relative to large businesses from different aspects. So the first one I'm going to show you is total number of employees hired by small versus large businesses. Small businesses used to hire more employees than large businesses in late 1990s. But the employment number at large businesses has been growing much faster, outpacing small firms. Particularly after 2007, the last financial crisis and the recession, large firms started to hire more people than small firms. From late 2007 to early 2009, we had a financial crisis and economic recession. And that recession had a much long-lasting impact on small businesses than large businesses. Employment at large businesses peaked in 2008 and declined only for 2 years, and then started to grow back and surpassed 2008 peak in year 2013, only 5 years later. However, in contrast, small business employment peaked in 2006 and did not come back to that level until 2016, a whole 10 years. Also notice that since 2010, the gap between large and small firms has been widening. This evidence has some implication to the current economic recovery, and particularly whether small businesses will be able to recover, as they will hit the hardest this year in spring and summer, and continue to this day. So the second statistic we can look at to measure small firms' performance and the contribution is total payroll. Total payrolls at both small and large firms have been growing, but we can see that the gap has also been widening. The widening gap can be attributed to two factors. One is simply that employment at large firms has been growing faster, as we just saw in the last slide. And the second is that large firms are also paying more on a per employee basis over time than small firms. So large firms on average pay 24% more in year 1997. And in year 2017, large firms on average pay 32% more than small firms. So in the last slides, we saw the number of employees hired and payroll paid by small businesses versus large businesses. This slide shows the percentage share of employment and payroll of small firms as of the total number of employees and the total amount of payroll of all businesses. Clearly, both have been on a declining trend, meaning that small businesses' contribution has been declining over time, at least for these 2 decades. We can also look at another aspect of performance and the contribution to the economy, the sales receipts. For sales receipts, US Census only collects the data once every 5 years, for years ended in 7 and 2. Here, I'm also able to include non-employer small businesses. Although we have a very large number of non-employer small businesses, almost 26 million in year 2017, they only generate slightly, on average, over a long period of time, slightly more than 3% of sales. And consistent with the last few slides, the share of revenues generated by small businesses has been declining over time, from almost 40% in year 1997 to slightly above 35% in 2012. And the large businesses have been growing sales much faster, and their share has been growing from slightly above 57% to almost 62%. So relatively, small businesses have been growing much faster and contribute more to the economy in the last 2 decades than small businesses. So here is just a quick recap or summary of the last few slides based on the historical performance of small businesses. Small businesses remain very important, and the growth of small businesses is driven largely by non-employers. However, growth of employer small businesses has been stagnant. Also, small business firms' contribution to the economy has been declining relative to large businesses since late 1990s on all aspects of performance measures, employment, payroll, and sales receipts. It also takes much longer for small businesses to recover and grow after an economic recession. So, what are the factors or reasons in causing small business to underperform? So we believe these are some of the challenges faced by small businesses in the past 2 decades to cause small businesses to underperform large businesses. And likely, these will continue to put small businesses in competitive disadvantage relative to large businesses. However, these are also opportunities to those small businesses that can overcome all these challenges. So these 6 challenges can be grouped basically into 3 categories. So technology, financial, and fundamental business model. So 2 for each category. On the technology side, as we are living in the age of digitization, investing in and catching up with new technology has been the utmost determining factor to a firm's success. So however, small businesses may not be able to invest in cutting-edge technology and data to make quick data-driven decisions. And small businesses may not be able to compete with large businesses to attract talents who have adequate training in technology and data skills. On the financial side, small businesses rely almost entirely on very limited source of personal and family savings. It is getting much harder for small businesses to invest in technology and data and other assets to have a competitive edge to start with. Small businesses, we believe, are in fact also very fragile. A recent survey conducted by Harvard Business School in March found that small businesses on average only had about 2 weeks of cash on hand. So they are very fragile. This is why small businesses were hardest hit in spring and summer, and the government had to provide various help to small businesses. On the business model side, small businesses are inherently risky, as many of them only focus on one particular product. And unlike large businesses that can diversify across multiple lines of business. So this causes small business owners to bear enormous amount of risk. So all these, combined, that may discouraging, small business owners, to start a new business. So just a caveat: these are our speculations, as what have caused and will likely to cause small businesses to underperform large businesses, as we don't have data on small businesses to empirically verify. So, despite all these discouraging historical underperformance and also challenges facing small businesses, there is still hope. So people haven't been discouraged entirely and lost their entrepreneurial spirit. So in the third quarter this year, we had a huge spike in new business applications, particularly the very encouraging high propensity applications. So the orange bars. So these are applications that have high propensity of turning into businesses with payroll. So contributing potentially more to employment and GDP growth than other types. So this is also in sharp contrast to what happened after last recession in 2008 and 2009, when we when new business applications had declined for quite a few quarters before it started to grow in 2010. So we hope small businesses will regain their momentum and contribute more to the economy in years to come. So now I'm turning it over to Dan.
Had a little glitch there trying to unmute. I hope everyone can hear me now. Dr. Zhang, I am completely in agreement with your list of challenges and opportunities for small business persons. I hope at the end of my comments today, nonetheless, that those in attendance will feel somewhat encouraged about the future, even in these uncertain times. It appears that we here at Pioneer West Virginia Federal Credit Union really have been West Virginia's best kept secret for the past 80 years or so. Now, admittedly, we are a small potato, so to speak, by the standards of those big out-of-state mega banks that do business in West Virginia. But for a homegrown West Virginia organization, we do okay. And we're very proud of what we've done, in fact. I'll comment on those 10 teachers with $75 a little bit later in my presentation. In recent years, we've been able to bring some very favorable attention to our credit union on a national scale. We can go to the next slide there. And by extension to West Virginia as well. One of our vision statements for this credit union passed by the board of directors is to be a model for other financial institutions to emulate. We like to think that being designated as one of America's the credit union of the year is evidence that we're making some progress toward that goal. And that's only one of multiple accolades we've received over the past decade. Dr. Sang, can you move the slide one? There we go. More recently, we've been evaluated as one of the best credit unions to work for in the nation for the second time. And readers of the Charleston Gazette Mail newspaper voted us as the best credit union in the Kanawha Valley, again, for a second time. Next slide, please. I know everyone is really still excited and anxious to talk about presidential politics. So let's start today's session with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt signed off on the Federal Credit Union Act back in 1934, creating a regulatory framework for America's credit unions independent of the framework for the traditional banking community. He was still in office 6 years later, fighting polio when our credit union was chartered back in 1940. The United States at that time hadn't yet entered World War II, but it was already raging in Europe at that time. Sir Winston Churchill came into power as the British Prime Minister along that year, getting off to a good start, by the way. How's this for a political slogan? I have nothing to offer you but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. I'm not sure Sir Winston could be elected to much of anything in this day and time, but that's the subject for another day. At that time, the United States was still very much suffering from the Great Depression. Over the previous 5 years, 321 banks had failed. And yet, it was in that environment that 10 visionary local Kanawha County school teachers took what was at that time had to be a very bold step to found a financial institution, a credit union, to serve as a substitute for a bank. Now, somehow they scraped together $75 from their cigar box savings there to pay the chartering fee to start this credit union to serve persons of modest means. And there were, and there still are, a lot of West Virginians who are persons of modest means. But, we can spend the day talking about all of the highs and lows of these presidential administrations in terms of economics, war and peace, social changes, and on and on. But the point I want to make here is that presidents, senators, congressmen, and all of the bureaucrats that support them come and go. And so do products, services, and businesses, I might add. far too many of those to even begin listing as examples here this morning. In the meantime, we as leaders in this generation need to be making some decisions and laying some plans into place so that our families and our businesses and the organizations we represent will be here after another 14 or 15 presidential administrations come and go. As we try to do that, there's no shortage of doom and gloom out there. We've already talked about a little bit of that. Let's go to the next slide there. This contributor to the Wall Street Journal, a guy by the name of Greg Ip, was reading the Congressional Budget Office report on their outlook, and his outlook, short-term and long-term, really is not all that great. Now, the Congressional Budget Office, as we all know, is supposed to be a nonpartisan organization, so their evaluations really shouldn't be influenced by short-term politics, and we hope that that is the case there. Now, I share, as I'm sure many of you do too, Mr. Ip's concern about national debt and declining U.S. population, particularly, as we all know, with the net outbound migration of population out of West Virginia, particularly draining us of some of the best and brightest minds as young people leave the state to start their careers and families, and many of those never to return there. It's a sad thing. Now, there's not a lot that you and I can do on an individual basis talking about national debt. Now, there are some of you listening today that can do something about the declining population issue, so get to that. Anyway, next slide. More bad news coming here. You know, it's not my intent by showing you to depress you by showing you these slides here. But as business leaders, we have to be aware of these negative outlooks and the supporting basis of the thought behind all of these things. Awareness of both the positive and negative is certainly necessary for good decision making, to say the least. Yeah, you know, there's a big bad world out there wanting to eat our lunches, no question. It's easy to feel helpless in the middle of trends and events so much larger than us in this day and time, but we can't dwell on all of the bad news out there. Accept it for what it is and deal with it and move forward. Rather than stressing over things, my personal approach has always been to kind of try to focus on the things where I can have some degree of control. In my case, that means getting up in the morning and looking for ways to make the lives of our members and our staff just a little bit better than they were the day before. And I'm amazed. People all throughout human history, from cavemen forward, have always had really a surprising level of endurance and resiliency in the face of trials and tribulations. And that thought, I think, was summed up very well in some dialogue from the movie Jurassic Park. So let's take a look at that slide. Design. You know, people are creative when it comes to survival. So I've added my own little twist to that thought from the movie there. If nothing else, this pandemic is forcing all of us to rethink the hows and the whys of the things that we're doing. Some business leaders who may have become kind of comfortable beforehand, kind of coasting through life, if you will, they can't do that anymore by necessity. Now, for all of the negative new normal scenarios out there, I believe that there is a very distinct possibility that out of these times, we'll see a lot of very positive things happen simply because people are literally being shoved out of their comfort zone, kicking and screaming sometimes. If necessity is the mother of invention, then we may be in the middle of the mother of all opportunities before us. Next slide, please. But this path out of where we're at right now through the pandemic era isn't obvious, and it may not be easy, and we may experience a lot of discomfort along the way. Can't make any promises otherwise. There are many businesses that don't have the staying power, as Dr. Zane referred to in his comments, very thin margins, very thin cash reserves, et cetera, who are not going to make it through this period. We need to accept that. We don't want to be one of those, so let's plan to do otherwise and make wise decisions. It's why it's important for us to stay focused on those long range goals and being successful in whatever this new normal turns out to be. I'd like to share with you, next slide please, some information that's very specific to our financial organization, a little peek behind the curtains, if you will, to help you kind of make sense of the world around you. And this is some things that probably most of you do not see if you're not in a financial institution. And hopefully this will be kind of helpful for a sense of perspective of the world around us. So let's go to the next slide. And I'm going to show you one more slide, please. I'm going to show you 3 slides here displaying various trends in consumer behavior during the pandemic from a financial institution perspective, specifically us. All 3 of the slides I'm going to show you are from data from our credit union from beginning daily from December 31st through last Wednesday's November 11th, Veterans Day. For confidentiality purposes, I'm not displaying the actual balances here, but really it's the trends that we want to focus on. Now, I believe that our experience is highly correlated with other credit unions and banks. National trade publications tell us that consumers have pulled back on both credit card and debit card spending and just spending in general during the pandemic. And so let's kind of take a look at some of these things. The first slide here displays trends in our credit card balances. This indicates from top to bottom a 15% drop in credit card balances on our portfolio over the course of the year. At the top left part of the graph here, we observe consumers beginning the new year with relatively high balances after running up balances during the Christmas spending season. All of our credit card payments in our institution are all due on the 25th of the month. And we've kind of noted all of those due dates out there on the slides. Typically, as you see in the top left hand, in the days immediately leading up to the due date, you'll see people starting to make their credit card payments and the balances go down correspondingly. And then after the 25th, when everything is due, people build those balances back up a little bit. And, you know, that's kind of a normal cycle. What we've seen this year is a steady decline in overall balances. So let's see here how some of the stimulus programs and things going on in the broader environment have affected, excuse me, have affected, I'm hoarse, pardon me, how have affected these balances here. Beginning back in April, we started to see the stimulus checks go out, $1,200 to $2,400 per household. It would appear in our case that many of our members took that money and used that as an opportunity to pay their credit card balances down rather than engage in new spending. Following behind those stimulus checks, we immediately saw the effect of a $600 additional amount being added to those persons drawing unemployment. So we believe that these 2 events contributed to the decline in our own credit card balances. And now that both of those programs have ended, we're experiencing a period where balances are relatively stable, but also at a relatively low level from what we were experiencing the first of the year. Here in our own internal discussions among my leadership team, we really don't see the Christmas spending period coming up this year being one that's going to enable us to recapture those balances to be comparable to what we're doing last year. Just how much short of that, we don't know, but we just don't think we're going to reach that peak by any stretch of the imagination this year. In the meantime, our interest income from outstanding balances on our loan portfolio here in credit cards is really dropped by 27% from where we were at the first part of the year. Let me take another drink. Pardon me, I have some allergies that sit in the back of my throat and annoy me here. This slide here shows trends in loan payment delinquencies as a percentage of our overall loan portfolio. The blue and the red lines along the bottom represent a fairly small portion of the portfolio when people reach the 31 and 60-day overdue marks. Now, these represent a relatively high level of concern as it relates to the potential to ultimately have to charge off some portion of those loans. In both cases, even these already at a low level have continued to decline. In fact, that's a favorable movement over the course of the year. The green line that goes up and down and dominates this slide represents loans that are overdue by 1 day up to 30 days. We view this line as a kind of a leading indicator, if you will, of loans which might ultimately fall into the other two categories representing greater risk there. Once again, we see there does appear here to be a cause and effect relationship between government stimulus programs and loan payment delinquencies working favorably to the borrowers. Since the programs ended, the trend line does have an almost imperceptible, but nonetheless, there is a slight increase being represented here. The good news for borrowers is that many people have managed to make their loan payments on time and have avoided the late payment penalty fees for that. At the institutional level here, our year-to-date fee income for late charges is down 18%. Let's move to the next slide. This graph displays trends in the level of checking account overdraft balances. Yet again here, we see the government stimulus programs make it possible for consumers to have enough money in their checking accounts so that they can clear all of those checks before they run out of money. Our year-to-date fee income on this item is down by 28%. Since the stimulus programs ended, you'll see on the graph here, we're seeing a rise in the overdrafted dollars again. Forgive me, folks. As a side note, by the way, despite the fact that fee income from overdraft activity is a relatively large fee income item on for banks and credit unions, we actually discourage people from engaging in decisions which put them in a position to be charged for this fee. We charge less than many institutions do for this service, but this is one of those fees that can and we believe should be avoided and could be avoided, I might add, by better personal financial management on the part of consumers. So this is one of those areas where we think that consumer education is certainly needed in the community so that people do not expose themselves to things that they don't need to be exposed to. I'll get off of that little soapbox for the moment. You might find it odd, though, that I'm not overly complaining about the loss of money from these trends. You know, if you're managing a business for the benefit of stockholders or other investment who are demanding high rates of return from their investments, then things like this are problematic in a big way. As a credit union, we are a not-for-profit financial cooperative. We're owned by our members to provide services and value to them. So we actually celebrate the fact that our members and apparently consumers in this region generally are doing as financially well as they are during this pandemic season. But I do think it's important here to remind ourselves of a couple of things. This good fortune was largely caused by these temporary stimulus money and the enhanced unemployment, which has now ended. And there are those in West Virginia, in our communities, who have not benefited to any significant degree from these programs, whose lives, who personally, occupationally, and financially are very, very stressed even to this day. The future is very uncertain for them. Now, the new Congress may, and I think probably will, pass some sort of additional stimulus soon, probably not before year end, but shortly thereafter. I was a little bit surprised, frankly, just as a personal note, that President Trump and Speaker Pelosi could not have come together going into the election period. It was my observation that they could come do something as opposed to doing nothing, and then each could blame the other going into the elections for not doing more. I thought that was the perfect political setup for both sides, but that just did not happen. As it sits now, this creates a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty about the future and what is ultimately going to be rolled out. And finally, even if these stimulus programs are enacted to some degree in whatever form they take in the immediate year ahead, that's still a short-term band-aid. We need some longer-term solutions, to say the least. So next slide. What are my armchair philosopher advice do we have here? Well, first, take advantage of the low rate interest rate environment. Reduce your cost of borrowing individually and for your small businesses. For savers, watch out for scams. You know, scammers are going to make some money off of you in good times and bad, and they play on the fears and your desire to get additional yield out there by offering things that just aren't exactly right. Be highly skeptical of those things. Otherwise, just use your cash for whatever liquidity purposes you may have, and any excess that you don't need for liquidity purposes in your family or in your business, use that to pay off debt. Next slide, please. The phrase or quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson about these times being good times if you just know what to do with them comes back to us today, and that's certainly the question, to say the least. Years ago, someone nudged me awake, as we go to the next slide, in economics class, and I locked in on a little idea here that seems to have stuck with me to this day. And it seems to have worked well in my application in the business world. It may work well for you too. In evaluating your business and the options you're offering, if that marginal revenue is better than the marginal cost, well, go forward and do with it. It's not always the most efficient way to do business or the most desirable way to do business, but nonetheless, it's still worthwhile to do it. As noted earlier, this low rate environment here has created really an unprecedented opportunity to enable consumers to restructure their existing debt for their benefit. In our particular case, at the end of October, we've already experienced full year record-breaking loan production, both in our mortgage and our consumer lending portfolio. And while we're putting these loans on the books at unprecedented low rates and accordingly narrower margins for us, we believe it's in the credit union spirit to bite the bullet on some of these things in order to enable families and small businesses to better manage and pay down debt and persevere through these times. So next slide, please. So in closing, let me just go back to my previous comment about what the pandemic may offer to us as opposed to take from us a little bit. We've got to use this time to be level-headed and creative. We can still be proactive, even in a time that is very frequently forcing us to be reactive in some degree as well. We may not be completely able to be the masters of our own destiny, as the saying goes, but we can't really sit back and just let life happen to us either. So let's be even more resolved as we walk away from here this morning to create a better future for ourselves and for those that follow us. Dr. Zhang, thank you very much, and thank all of you who've hung in with us and borne with these comments. I hope that you feel a little bit better about preparing for the future than you did before you came in this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharang and Dan, for an enthusiastic, informative, and insightful presentation today. It will certainly help us all think more about small business planning in this time of uncertainty. I'll now read some of the questions that were posted during the event and some that arrived by email before the event. This first question is for Dan. It says, in reference to the low rates being paid to savers, where can people go to get better rates?
Well, I dare not even begin to attempt to give specific investment advice in a forum like this. So let me make a few general comments that may be helpful to you. There are those out there in the community historically who depend on interest income from their savings and investments to supplement their Social Security and other retirement income to do things like put food on the table, pay the electric bill and so forth. Those folks have been really hard pressed going back to the financial meltdown of 2008 when the Federal Reserve started lowering the interest rates. And so we've now been 12 years into a very low interest environment, and people who depend on the savings really struggle to find yields. So what do? Is the question. I wish I had an easy answer to that question, and I really don't. We typically here pay above average interest rates on our deposit products, but you know what? Even a little bit more of not much still isn't much either, you know, and so I understand and I'm sensitive to that plight. But I would caution the consumers to be really ultra skeptical, if you will, of advertisements, phone call solicitations promising these eye-popping rates of return that you see from time to time. The old adage about if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. Scammers are playing on the anxieties of people who need that interest income for their livelihood. And this, by the way, is one of those areas that is just ripe for elder financial abuse in particular. So all of you out there, I would say, check on those senior citizens in your family and make sure that they're not being scammed. Look after those. From a credit union perspective, as an institution, we've been actually drawing down on our fixed income investments, primarily agency-backed mortgage securities, for the better part of the past decade, in drawing those down. What we've been doing is this, by design, we've been redirecting those funds to members for mortgages, automobiles, and other needs that require financing out there. That is to say, we institutionally are investing in the people of West Virginia. And just as a general remark, you know, likewise, I suggest that whatever resources and assets you may have, money or otherwise, invest those things in time, money, other resources, and things that lay a foundation and prepare a better future for you and your family and businesses. That's the best advice I've got for you this morning. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Dan. Another question is, what is the survival rate of small businesses?
Well, the answer is a short answer. From 1994 to 2008, just based on some old statistics, the average survival rate in the first 2 years was only 67%, and the 5-year survival rate was slightly under 50%, 48.8% for that 15-year period. So basically, small businesses tend to have fairly low survival rate than large businesses. So the failure rate, in other words, the failure rate is fairly high. Thank you.
Okay, this might relate a little bit to that. What implications do you think there is of small businesses being a smaller percentage of payroll, employees, and sales over time?
Can you repeat the question, please, Nancy?
I think they want to know that you talked about that small businesses were a smaller percentage of several performance measures over time, and they want your opinion on what you think might be the implications of that.
Well, the implication probably is, we have, fairly low, new business applications or new startup of, small businesses, at least for that, 2, decades in a period. And also, for many, new startup, businesses who have fairly, high, failure rate. So the implication may be that, it's fairly, in my, from a financial, perspective, so starting a small business is fairly risky.
If I could add to that, Dr. Zhang, yes. The graph that you showed us earlier about the spike in new business foundations on the ultra small business side, the sole proprietors and the two-person partnerships, That goes back to, I think, something that I mentioned about the resiliency people have to adapt in times of crisis. So some of those folks may not have ventured out on their own, having a safety net perhaps of a regular wage paying job, but now circumstances have thrown them into a position where they're trying to do something for their own economic survival, and perhaps some very good things can come out of that.
Okay, we have another question. It says, in reference to being recognized as one of the top 50 credit unions to work for in America, what standards do you have to meet?
Well, one of our trade publications, the Credit Union Journal, partnered with a consulting firm, the Best Companies Group, and they do this service among other industries as well. In our particular case, 25% of the scoring for this is based on our personnel policies, the procedure manual, compensation and benefit, things of that nature that the consulting company takes a look at. 75% of the score comes from an anonymous survey administered to our staff. And then they put it through the little magic box and come out with a number, and then compare that with all of the other credit unions they survey across the nation. And I'm just really thrilled that, that we're apparently doing some things right that makes this a place to work that people want to come and not just have a job, but to have a career and doing something bigger and better beyond themselves. So we're thrilled to be that honored and hope to maintain that standard, you know. But who would have thought that a credit union in West Virginia would be one of the great places to work in America? But that's what we're trying to make this.
Great. I think this next question is for both of you. How significant is the reliance on personal and family savings? And I think they mean for small businesses.
Well, let me just kind of speak to that from a lender's perspective to start. Neither a credit union nor your commercial bank relationship, we are not venture capitalists. And for a small business to get the seed capital to get something going is a challenge, no question about it. And it's not uncommon for us to have application for people who are essentially wanting to seed capital, venture capital to start a new business. And that's just not what we do. And that's not what your typical commercial, your local community banker is going to do otherwise. Don't get mad at anybody when they shy away from that. It's just not the business model of what we do. So the question is, what do you go out there and rely on? And unfortunately, what we also see, I think, in the small business startup is that they will exhaust whatever family capital may be available to them and their own personal stuff and all the friends and family that have faith in them, and begin running up additional debt through credit cards and things like that. And to Dr. Zhang's comment about the high failure rates, that really sets up a scenario for a lot of even worse things to happen to small business persons. So having good advisors, having access to Marshall University School of Business, and to give those entrepreneurs some guidance to exhibit a good sound judgment and not be too Pollyanna-ish about the future. You know, just not trying to discourage anybody, mind you, by any stretch of the imagination, but just to be level-headed and sound in your judgment.
Well, Dan, you are absolutely right. Banks and other financial institutions naturally should have some reservation making loans to new startup small businesses. And in fact based on small business finance survey, banks only, all financial institutions only provided roughly about 17% of sources of fund to start a new business. And in fact about 65% are from entrepreneurs own personal or family savings. So 2/3 are their own personal or family savings.
Wow. Okay, great. Another question is, for both of you, overall, do you think the trends you see, or I guess this is for Dan, the trends you see at your institution, are those happening at other institutions, credit unions, and is that good news?
Well, as I mentioned at the outset of my comments, I think that our experience is going to be somewhat representative with a high degree of correlation between what we're experiencing and what other financial institutions are experiencing as well throughout the entire nation. Some of that will vary a little bit based on the risk tolerance of every individual organization, but the same overall trends are pretty much national right now.
Okay, great. We have time for one more question. I think they're referring to one of your graphs, Sharon. You show the number of small businesses is about the number of small businesses. Do you think the decrease for COVID-19 will be similar to that we saw in 2008? Or how do you think it'll compare? I think going backwards a little bit. Yeah.
This number?
So all the blips you see for 2008. Because of the economic, yeah.
I haven't, been able to find the bankruptcy, data, to extend this, plot of the, number of, business firms, to the third quarter yet. Okay, there is some evidence, showing that, we had some very significant closures of, small businesses, and particularly small business firms. So, but if we combine this with this spike in the new business applications, probably the increase in new business startup may mitigate business failures. So we may not see the decrease in 2008 or 2009 this time, and particularly with all these government stimulus and support programs that will certainly help many small businesses to survive this difficult time.
That certainly is good news. Okay, that wraps it up for our 10th HERD 2020 Insights Small Business Webinar. This was our last webinar for 2020. We are putting together the spring schedule. Look for your registration email for our first 2021 event to arrive in January. We appreciate your participation in today's event and in all the events this year. And always remember, we are Marshall.